The wind up in the Colorado mountains wasn't bone-deep cold, but it had a way of getting through your jacket anyway, sharp and dry, full of altitude and pine. We were 3 days into a corporate retreat that was supposed to build trust, improve communication, and remind us that we were all part of the same team, even if we spent most of the workday ignoring each other in email threads. Earlier, there had been name games and awkward icebreakers, but now they had us doing something more elaborate, a night drill called Crisis Response in Low Visibility, which was basically a fake rescue scenario in the woods. Initially, I was paired with TJ from accounting, a decent guy who told the same joke twice at breakfast and thought he was charming. He dropped out before we even started, claiming he tweaked something in his knee. A moment later, the organizers handed me a new partner, Travis Mills. For my tea, I didn't know much about Travis beyond his name and department. He was relatively new, about 12 years younger than me, and didn't speak often in meetings, though when he did, it was usually something thoughtful and precise. He had that calm, unbothered presence some people carry, like they see more than they let on, but aren't in a rush to explain it. There was something about that quality that I found. Not unsettling exactly, but definitely hard to ignore. We were given a flashlight with the beam half covered by tape, a whistle in case we actually got lost, and a sealed envelope marked open only if necessary. The whole thing felt a little absurd, but I was already here, already zipped into my fleece, and I figured I might as well see it through. About 10 minutes into the drill, we were crouched low and moving slowly between some mock avalanche debris scattered through the woods. The darkness was more complete than I expected. Even with the muted flashlight, every shadow looked like it might move. The ground underfoot was uneven, littered with branches, rocks, and the occasional crunch of gravel. I caught my arm on something, low-hanging, and let out a quiet, annoyed curse. "You okay?" Travis asked from behind me, his voice low and even. "Yeah, I'm good. Just got snagged." He didn't say anything else. We kept moving carefully, both of us avoiding small talk as if the quiet somehow mattered out here, as if breaking it would pop the bubble of strange tension the exercise created. At one point, we had to shimmy through a narrow gap between two fallen logs. I went first and almost made it, but then my foot caught on a root and I twisted awkwardly, trying to pull myself free without falling flat on my face. "Hang on," Travis said behind me, crouching close. He reached past me, brushing away the branch that had me stuck. As he did, his hand grazed mine, barely, just a passing touch, but something about it felt sharper than the mountain air. It wasn't the touch itself that caught me off guard. It was the way he hesitated afterward. Like he felt it too, like he was weighing whether to let the moment pass or acknowledge it. He said nothing, and neither did I, but the air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken that hadn't been there before. We got through the rest of the drill without another word, turned in the envelope to the organizers, and started walking back to the cabins. I expected him to peel off as soon as we hit the lights of the main camp, but he stayed beside me until we reached the fire pit, where most of the others had gathered. Someone passed me a beer I didn't ask for, and I took it out of politeness. But I didn't sit. The flames flickered across a dozen relaxed faces, everyone laughing too loudly and swapping stories about childhood mishaps or bad travel experiences. It felt like I was watching a scene I was supposed to be part of, but couldn't quite enter. I turned to head back to my cabin, and there he was, Travis, standing just a few feet away, hands buried in his jacket pockets like he'd been waiting. "You okay?" he asked, the same words as before, but heavier now, more deliberate. I nodded. "Just tired?" He didn't say anything for a second, then stepped a little closer, close enough that I felt the warmth from his body, even with the wind cutting between us. Before I could add anything, before I could give him a smile or a polite nod or whatever people do in moments like that, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't slow or hesitant. It wasn't desperate or dramatic. It was fast, confident, and over before I could register what had even happened. I took half a step back. "Travis, I know," he said quickly, already turning, already giving me distance again. "Sorry. That was stupid." And then he disappeared into the dark edge of the woods, like he hadn't just crossed a line neither of us had named. I stood there for another minute, unsure whether I was more startled or intrigued or just confused by my own reaction. It was just a kiss. Nothing more. Back in Denver, the Monday after the retreat felt like stepping into a room that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Everything looked the same: familiar desks, the usual low hum of conversation, The slightly burnt smell from the break room toaster, but the air felt off. Or maybe I was just different. I avoided looking for him the entire morning. I kept my eyes on my inbox, my coffee, on anything that wasn't a certain corner near IT. At lunch, I told myself I'd take a walk instead of going to the cafeteria, which sounded like a perfectly healthy choice. But let's be honest, I just didn't want to run into him in line. Both of us pretending we didn't remember the kiss that hadn't been talked about. That night, Jason suggested we go out to dinner. No occasion, no reason. Just you and me night, he said, smiling like he was trying to practice it in the mirror. I didn't ask why. I said yes before he could get self-conscious. We went to a place we hadn't been to in months somewhere. Dimly lit with a menu full of things I used to crave when we first started dating. Jason ordered the lamb like he always did. I picked at a salad I didn't really want. He started talking about vacation ideas, maybe Mexico. Or maybe that little cabin outside Telluride, the one with the hot tub and no Wi-Fi. I nodded, made the appropriate sounds, but my brain was somewhere else entirely. Not even with Travis, exactly, just elsewhere. Like someone had disconnected a wire and the lights hadn't come back on yet. At one point, Jason paused, mid-sentence, fork in hand, waiting for some kind of response. I realized too late that I'd missed the question. Sorry? I said, blinking. What were you saying? He gave a small smile. Doesn't matter. We drove home in near silence. He rested his hand on the gear shift like he used to, but didn't reach for mine. The next few days at work were worse. Travis didn't avoid me exactly, but he wasn't the same. He didn't linger at the coffee machine, didn't crack quiet jokes when someone made a mistake during a meeting, didn't even glance up when I walked by his desk. It was almost worse than if he had said something. The space between us wasn't empty, it was heavy. Like a wall had gone up overnight and neither of us had the tools to chip at it. Friday evening, I stayed later than usual, mostly because I didn't want to go home yet. I was waiting for the elevator when I heard his steps. Behind me, steady, unmistakable. He stood beside me without saying a word at first. I didn't look at him. The numbers above the elevator glowed down slowly from 9 to 3. Then, quietly, like he'd been holding it in all week, he asked, "Did you regret that it happened? Or just regret that it ended so fast?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because I had too many, all tangled together, none of them clean. After a moment, he nodded like he understood, like he accepted whatever silence I gave him. But as I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed between us, I knew he didn't. Not really. The trip to Austin wasn't planned well, which felt about right for how things had been going lately. The flight had already been delayed twice, and by the time we landed, it was past midnight. We were booked at some downtown hotel that looked better in photos than in person. When the front desk told us there'd been a mix-up and they didn't have enough rooms, I just blinked at the woman behind the counter, too tired to be annoyed. "I can give you 2 singles," she said, typing furiously. "But they're on different floors." "That's fine," I replied immediately. Travis, standing beside me with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, nodded. "Yeah, no problem." We didn't say anything else on the elevator ride up. He got off on the 8th floor. I went up to 11. I thought about texting him later, maybe just a "you good?" or something easy like that, but I didn't. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling until the room finally stopped feeling unfamiliar. The next morning, I was in the lobby early, desperate for coffee and some kind of mental clarity before our first meeting. The machine was sputtering when he walked up beside me, hair still damp from the shower, sleeves rolled up like he hadn't even bothered to unpack properly. He didn't smile, just said "morning" and grabbed a cup. We made small talk about the weather, the meeting schedule, how everything always starts 15 minutes late in Texas. I kept waiting for something to shift, but it didn't. It was just 2 coworkers in a lobby, waiting for caffeine to work its magic. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I think I need to leave that office." I turned, caught off guard. "You mean quit?" He nodded, staring at the floor. "Yeah, transfer maybe, or something else entirely." I waited, unsure if he was saying it for my benefit or just finally saying it out loud. He took a breath and looked at me. "But if I do that, if I walk away, I'm not going to be able to forget you. I thought I would, but I won't." It didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a decision already made. I didn't respond right away. My heart did something strange, like it leaned forward while the rest of me stayed completely still. I wanted to ask him what exactly he meant, what he expected me to do with that information, but I didn't. I just stood there, cup warm in my hands, trying not to feel everything at once. Later, on the flight back, I stared out the window the entire time. Jason picked me up from the airport and asked if everything had gone smoothly. I said yes, but in my chest, something was unraveling. It wasn't fear of what had already happened that kept me up that night. It was fear of what hadn't. The barbecue was the kind of social obligation that used to be easy. Friends we'd known for years, folding chairs in the backyard, kids chasing each other barefoot over the lawn, the smell of burgers and charcoal mixing with whatever cheap beer someone had brought in bulk. It should have been mindless, automatic. Instead, I spent most of the evening feeling like I'd been dropped into a scene I was supposed to remember how to play. But COULD in single quotes T. Jason was in rare form, laughing louder than usual, telling stories. I'd already heard him rehearse in the mirror when he thought I was asleep. He kept one hand on my waist almost the entire time, like he was trying to prove something, or maybe remind himself that we were still a unit. But I could feel how performative it was, like we were actors stuck in a long-running show that no one had the guts to cancel. His fingers never tightened. His touch never asked or checked in. It was just there like a prop. At one point, I caught a glimpse of myself in the sliding glass door, smiling, nodding, holding a paper plate full of potato salad, and I barely recognized the person looking back. I wondered how many people in that yard could tell, and how many were just as committed to pretending everything was fine in their own lives, too. The next day, the mask didn't come off. At the gym, Jason stood beside me during stretches and asked if I wanted to grab smoothies after. And I said, sure, like I always did, knowing full well we'd sit in the car in silence, sipping them without ever finishing. Back at work, things weren't much better. Travis kept his distance, which I expected, but every now and then I'd catch him watching me out of the corner of his eye. He never said anything. He didn't need to. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. What surprised me was how often I found myself checking for him, whether he was online, whether he was in the kitchen, whether he'd posted anything to the internal feed. He rarely did, but once in a while he'd like something I shared, and it would send a low ripple of energy through me, but I hated and craved in equal measure. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, after a call that went nowhere and a meeting that could have been an email, I walked into the empty conference room to find a single piece of paper sitting on the table at my usual seat. Folded in half, handwriting in all caps, familiar, careful, not rushed. Sometimes it's better to say the truth before it finds its own way out. No signature. No context, but I didn't need either. I stood there for a minute, holding the note, wondering whether to throw it away or fold it into my notebook like some secret I wasn't ready to let go of. I told myself it was just a scrap of paper. That it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't make myself toss it. Not yet. Sunday mornings used to follow a rhythm. I'd wake up before Jason, start the coffee, scroll through the news while the house stayed quiet, and wait for him to shuffle in wearing that old navy t-shirt with the faded fire department logo on the back. Sometimes he'd kiss the top of my head without saying anything, and I'd take that as affection. Other times, he'd move right past me into the kitchen, and I'd take that as normal. We weren't always warm, but we had a pattern, and for a long time, I thought that counted. For something, this Sunday, I didn't make coffee. I didn't scroll. I didn't wait for Jason to wake up. I left the house in running shoes before the sun had climbed all the way up. Earbuds in, pace steady, breath sharp in the cool air. I didn't run for exercise or for clarity. I ran because I needed to be alone in a way I hadn't been in weeks, maybe longer. With each mile, the noise in my head got quieter, or at least more distant. It didn't go away, but it stopped shouting. When I got back, sweat cooling on my back, I opened the front door and knew immediately something was different. The silence in the house wasn't casual or comfortable, it was heavy. Jason's car was still in the driveway, which meant he was home, but the living room was empty, and the kitchen light was on like it had been forgotten in a rush or left on for effect. My laptop was sitting open on the counter, not where I'd left it. The chat app window glowed faintly on the screen. A yellow sticky note was stuck right above the keyboard. It wasn't passive-aggressive. It wasn't angry. Just 5 words scribbled in Jason's blunt, all capital handwriting. You forgot to log out. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't read the chat. I didn't need to. The note said enough, and not just about what he had seen or what he suspected, but about the space we were now occupying together. He hadn't confronted me. He hadn't yelled or demanded an explanation. He just made sure I knew that he knew. Without leaving any space for a conversation, I wasn't sure I could have. I took a shower that lasted too long. Towel wrapped tight as I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint sounds of him. Moving around downstairs? We didn't speak that day, not really. We exchanged a few words about dinner. We asked each other if the laundry had been switched. The kind of communication that keeps a house running even when the people inside it have stopped trying. That night, I called Travis. I told myself I just wanted to end things properly, to say it aloud, make it clear that it couldn't keep going the way it had, that whatever line we'd stepped over had to be drawn again. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, like he already knew. "I think we need to stop," I said. "It's gone too far. I can't keep doing this." There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough that I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. "I figured you'd pick stability," he said finally, with no bitterness in his voice. Just something else I couldn't name. I wanted to argue with that. I wanted to say he was wrong, that this wasn't about choosing safety over feeling or fear over truth. But the problem was, I wasn't sure he was wrong. It was a Tuesday. The kind of bland, gray-skied afternoon that made everything feel like a waiting room. I had just stepped out of a meeting where no one listened and nothing got decided, and I was walking to the coffee shop down the block more out of habit than desire. My head was full of noise, but none of it coherent, just static from the last few weeks that I couldn't quite sort into anything useful. And then I saw him. Travis, standing just outside the coffee shop door, holding a medium-sized cardboard box with both arms like he was bracing himself against a wind that hadn't arrived. Yet, for a second, neither of us said anything. He looked different, not in the obvious ways. Not his hair or his clothes, but in his posture, in the way his face had gone still the moment he saw me. Like he was doing mental math he'd already done before and still hated the answer. I opened the door and he stepped back without a word, letting me go in first. I ordered something I wasn't in the mood for, then turned and asked, "You leaving?" He glanced down at the box and nodded. New job, new city. Needed a reset. I didn't push for details. I just motioned toward the corner table near the window, and we sat down like people who used to talk often and didn't know how to do it anymore. I told them it was about growth, he said, setting the box on the floor and leaning back in. His chair, fingers laced behind his head for a second before dropping them to his lap. But really, I just couldn't figure out who I was becoming, trying to keep things clean, trying not to mess up what already felt broken. I looked at him, this version of him that wasn't trying to read me or provoke me, just talking, like a person who had already let go of what they couldn't hold. "You weren't the problem," I said, not even sure if that was what he needed to hear, or if I needed to say it for myself. He shook his head, not disagreeing, just tired, maybe not. But I still felt like the weight in the boat no one asked for, so I'm stepping out before it sinks. We sat there in the quiet that follows things people don't say. No anger, no tension, just the space between two people who both knew this was the end of whatever strange, real thing had happened. When he stood, he looked at me with something close to peace, maybe not happiness, maybe not even resolution, but something steadier than guilt, and then he kissed me. One last time. It wasn't fast or urgent or confused. It wasn't searching for permission. It wasn't asking for a decision. It was a goodbye. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in either. I just let it happen, and then he was gone, walking out with the box under one arm, his head high, not turning back. I sat there for a while, the coffee going cold in front of me, watching people come in and out, wondering how something so quiet could still leave such a deep mark. After Travis left, the silence didn't come crashing in all at once. It seeped in slowly, like water under a door, subtle and steady until everything felt just slightly off. Jason announced a few days later that he was going to stay with his brother for a while, not framed as a separation, not called anything in particular. Just a casual statement made in the hallway while he zipped up a duffel bag and asked if I needed anything before he left. I told him no, and he nodded, kissed me on the cheek like it was still part of the routine, and walked out without waiting for a reaction. I didn't stop him, didn't ask what he meant, didn't offer any clarity, because by that point, we both understood that naming things didn't fix them. It only made the silence louder. I stayed with my friend Sherry for a few nights, unsure whether I was running away or just trying to catch my breath. Her guest room had pale green walls, a window that let in more sun than I was used to, and the kind of comforting disorder that made it feel lived in, not staged. She didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated, though she watched me like someone trying to count the seconds between lightning and thunder. One night, after we shared a bottle of red wine that neither of us particularly liked, she finally broke the surface. "You're not a terrible person," she said plainly. "Not trying to dress it up. You just waited too long to do anything different, and now everything broke on its own." I didn't argue because I wasn't sure I disagreed. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about inertia, about staying in something long after. You'd stop being a part of it, and then being surprised when the walls caved in. I kept trying to convince myself that I hadn't done anything, and that was technically true in all the ways that count on paper. But the reality was that not doing something can still leave damage behind. It just looks neater. I tried to pour myself into spreadsheets and timelines and back-to-back calls, but my focus had slipped somewhere behind me, and no amount of caffeine or effort could seem to drag it forward. Every notification made me flinch slightly, a strange tension in my stomach, couldn't quite explain, and when my phone buzzed one afternoon with a system alert user not found, I knew without checking twice. Travis had deleted his account. Not just logged off, not just muted everything. Gone. Like he had scrubbed himself from the building. The server, the story. I stared at the screen for longer than I should have, and then set the phone down slowly, unsure what I was feeling. Because grief didn't seem like the right word, but neither did relief. It was just absence. There was no last word, no dramatic exit, no wreckage to pick through, just a clean, deliberate erasure. When Jason came back to the house, it wasn't with the energy of someone returning home. It was more like someone retrieving luggage from a place they no longer belonged. He didn't knock, didn't text ahead, just opened the door with his key and stepped inside as if he'd never left. And for a brief second, I wondered if he'd try to pretend that nothing had changed, but he didn't speak right away. He looked around the living room, noted what hadn't moved, what hadn't been touched, and then walked past me toward the hallway, heading for the bedroom to gather whatever it was he needed to take with him. I didn't follow. I didn't ask if he wanted help or if he wanted to talk, because some part of me already knew the answer. When he came back with a bag over his shoulder and an old hoodie tied around his waist, he paused by the doorway and looked at me, not with blame, not with anger, just with the kind of quiet detachment that comes from watching something fade for so long that when it finally disappears, it's almost a relief. He didn't ask what had happened while he was gone, didn't press for names or details or stories. And when he finally spoke, it was with a kind of resignation I hadn't heard in his voice before. "I think I started disappearing before you did," he said simply, without accusation or heat. I just didn't notice how far I'd gone until I looked up and couldn't find myself in the middle of it anymore. There wasn't anything to say in response that wouldn't sound like explanation or defense, so I didn't try. I just nodded once, and he left a few minutes later, closing the door behind him with a kind of gentleness that made it feel final. Not cruel, just done. The house felt bigger without him, but not in a freeing way. It felt like someone had turned down the volume on the world and left me alone with all the background noise I'd been ignoring for months. I wandered around the kitchen, touched the back of a chair, poured water I didn't drink, stood at the window until the sky dimmed and the streetlights flickered on like they did every night. Indifferent to the fact that everything inside the house had shifted. At some point, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. No. Name? No context. "I hope you won't ever be someone's second choice again." I didn't need a name to know who it was from. I just turned off the kitchen light, listened to the silence settle into the walls, and boiled water for tea. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no performance to maintain, no version of myself I had to protect, no mask I needed to adjust. It was just me, in a room that no longer held anything it wasn't supposed to, and the truth I hadn't wanted to. Face was suddenly very simple. No one had left me. I had just finally stopped holding on.